The men and women are going to be able to do it, but they need to have leadership. When will you show leadership?
We have leadership.
When will you show leadership?
Why don't you show some leadership and stand up to your fellow Democrats who won't fund the troops, who stand and play partisan politics while you don't give us the money? You want to stand up here and talk about the troops? You won't show any political courage to actually fund our department because you have Trump derangement syndrome and can't actually commit to anything meaningful. So I put this on you, Senator.
Secretary Hegseth, you have trillions, you have over $1 trillion you're asking.
What happens when a senator forces the Secretary of Defense to defend his own words about a war that is still costing American lives? Senator Jon Ossoff came prepared with a very simple question for Pete Hegseth. Months ago, Hegseth declared that Iran's military had been destroyed and rendered combat ineffective. He later claimed that the United States had achieved every single objective of the operation. But now, with Iran still launching missiles, the Strait of Hormuz still closed, American service members still being killed, and the administration asking Congress for tens of billions more, Ossoff wanted to know one thing: were those statements actually true? And when Hegseth repeatedly avoided giving a simple yes or no answer, Ossoff kept pressing. Then the exchange became even more heated. Watch what happens when the senator refuses to let the secretary change the subject. Watch this. If you want to support the channel and get exclusive videos, kindly hit the join button below. That's how we keep this going.
Senator Ossoff.
I'll yield my time to Senator Ossoff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for your testimony. And General Kane, let me just begin by expressing on behalf of all Georgians our immense gratitude and admiration for the service members who are making tremendous sacrifices and conducting themselves with extraordinary selflessness and professionalism on behalf of the United States and our state's unified condolences and grief for the families of the 4 killed in action, and our hope for a swift recovery for the nearly 100 wounded over the last 2 weeks. And thank you to you for your service to the nation. Mr. Hegseth, you're requesting roughly $68 billion for the department through this supplemental, correct?
67, yes.
And yesterday, your department stated publicly, quote, U.S. forces struck Iranian military command centers, maritime capabilities, missile and drone launch sites, and air defense systems to degrade Iran's ability to continue attacking commercial vessels. That was a press release from your department. Is that a broadly accurate characterization of ongoing operations?
That sounds broadly accurate, yes.
On day 14 of this conflict, Mr. Secretary, day 14, nearly 5 months ago, you stated that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. That was on day 14 of the war. Was that an accurate statement?
They didn't have a Navy any longer. It was completely sunk. Their missiles were buried underneath a lot of their underground facilities, and their defense industrial base has been almost completely destroyed. So as far as a military assessment of Iran's capabilities, it didn't mean by any stretch of the imagination absolute zero, but their capabilities
Mr. Secretary,
at the lowest level
you stated that on day 14 of this conflict, in the second week of the conflict, you stated that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. Was that an accurate statement? Yes or no?
Iran's ability to challenge the United States of America at the level at which we're capable of.
That's not what I asked you, Mr. Secretary. You said on day 14, Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. Yes or no? Was that an accurate statement?
What the American military has done to the Iranian military is a historic military defeat.
Will you answer the question under oath?
And they're ineffective in that context.
3 weeks later, you declared victory. That was now nearly 4 months ago. 3 weeks after you'd already said Iran's military was destroyed and combat ineffective, you said, quote, Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory. You said Iran's military had been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come. And you stated we had, quote, achieved every single objective. Were those accurate statements?
It certainly was, on behalf of the men and women in uniform, a historic military victory over Iran.
Had Iran's military been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come? That was a statement that you made 4 months ago.
They had 160 naval vessels in the Blue Water Navy, and they're gone. Their Air Force is completely combat ineffective, and they don't have a defense industrial base. So describe to me a country that doesn't have an Air Force, a Navy, or a defense industrial base, and I will describe to you a country that does not have an effective military. It can lob missiles.
Mr. Secretary, you stated
missiles,
4
but it's
months
not a
ago
combat
that
effective
Iran's
military.
military had been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come. Has Iran's military been, for the last 4 months, combat ineffective?
It's been set back not just years, but likely decades.
You
considering
stated we
it
had,
can't
quote,
build at the level it did before, and not
you
even
stated
close.
we
It doesn't
had,
mean it
quote,
doesn't have capabilities.
Mr. Secretary, you stated we had, quote, achieved every single objective. Was that an accurate statement 4 months ago?
The main objective of this was to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Their main sites were obliterated. We're watching over them, and we're holding that issue. If they don't give them up at the table, there's other ways we can take them away.
Early in the conflict
Iran will
on
never
day
have a
3,
nuclear
Mr.
weapon.
Secretary, early in the conflict, day 3, you said one of those core objectives was to, quote, destroy the missile threat. And as you restated on day 5, to, quote, obliterate Iran's missiles and drones. Those were clearly and repeatedly stated core objectives of the campaign, which 4 months ago you declared had been completed victoriously with every single objective achieved. Were those objectives achieved 4 months ago?
No one ever stated that every single missile was gone. Ultimately, combat ineffective means they're not able to dig them out of their UGFs and shoot
Had
at
the
us.
missile
It
threat
doesn't mean they
been
don't
defeated
have
4
underground
months
facilities
ago?
where they put missiles in them and hold on to them because they're the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. So we never expected they would stop having capabilities to shoot. The question is at scale against an opponent like the United States of America, which went toe-to-toe with them and Iran couldn't.
You stated on March 8th, day 9 of the war, on 60 Minutes, you assured the American people of Iranian surrender. Does that remain your prediction?
Ultimately, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon to threaten the United States of America. That has been the objective, and it remains so.
So just to review, you will not answer whether your statement made on the 14th day of the war that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and made combat ineffective was a truthful statement to the American people as you sit here and ask for tens of billions more for the conflict.
Senator's time has
Had a
expired.
historic and effective military campaign against the largest state sponsor of terrorism.
Won't
and
answer
will
the
ensure they
question.
never
Senator
get a nuclear weapon,
Peters
Senator.
is recognized.
About the destruction of missiles, and yet the missiles that we saw hit recent targets are actually somehow more lethal, more deadly, more maneuverable than what we have seen in the past. So they're obviously improving their munitions. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed, reminding everybody it was open before the war. Prices were lower for everybody until the war, and it still remains closed. And of course, tragically, service members, our warfighters, who we care deeply about, are still dying. So what's different? Mr. Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth.
I think your characterization of this incredible effort as a failure is reckless. And I think it's irresponsible. And I think it smears the sacrifice of the troops that are out there making on behalf of the American people to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Shame on you and others who call this a quagmire and a failure, and then you want to turn around and say you support the warfighter. Either you do or you don't.
Is the
I can
nuclear
get you a
material
ticket-
still there,
I can
sir?
get you a ticket out to CENTCOM and talk to what those Americans are doing, and how committed they are to this effort, and how they want to ensure that Iran never threatens their families with a nuclear weapon. That's the kind of intensity that our warfighters have about making sure that Iran isn't capable of doing that.
Secretary Hegseth, if you listen to my comments, you would have heard me say how amazing our warfighters are.
I heard failure. And the word heard, I heard exactly
I will
what you
tell
said.
you how I use the
Heard
word
exactly
failure,
what you
because
said.
I use the word failure to their leaders. You, sir, are the failure, not the men and women who are on that front line, not the men and women who hold up their honor with distinction. But if there's a lack of a winning strategy, they're in harm's way. Their leaders have failed them. And that's what's happening. We have political leadership. You don't have a strategy. You don't have a long-term plan to actually win this war. Win the war. The men and women are going to be able to do it, but they need to have leadership. When will you show leadership?
We have leadership.
When will you show
leadership? Why don't you show some leadership and stand up to your fellow Democrats who won't fund the troops, who stand and play partisan politics while you don't give us the money? You want to stand up here and talk about the troops? You won't show any political
Secretary
courage
Hegseth.
to actually fund our department because you have Trump derangement syndrome and can't actually commit to anything meaningful. So I put this on you, Senator.
Secretary Hegseth, you have trillions, you have over $1 trillion, you're asking for $1.5 trillion. It's not a question of money, it's a question of leadership and understanding what it takes to actually win.
Political cowardice of Democrats who won't fund the troops.
Senator's time has expired. This will conclude our...
What we just watched was more than a heated exchange between a senator and the Secretary of Defense. It was a confrontation over accountability. Senator Ossoff wasn't asking Pete Hegseth whether American troops had fought bravely. He wasn't questioning the courage of the men and women serving overseas. His question was much narrower. When Hegseth told the American people that Iran's military had been destroyed and rendered combat ineffective, was that statement actually accurate? And that's where Hegseth struggled to give a direct answer. Instead of simply answering yes or no, he repeatedly returned to what the United States had accomplished, how badly Iran's military had been damaged, and how the operation had prevented Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Those may be important arguments, but they weren't exactly the question Ossoff was asking, and that's what made the exchange so intense. Because several months had passed since Hegseth's original declaration, yet according to the senator, the situation on the ground looked very different. Iran still had missile capabilities, the Strait of Hormuz remained closed, American service members were still being killed, and now the administration was asking Congress for tens of billions of additional dollars. That creates a very uncomfortable question for any administration. If the mission was already a historic and overwhelming victory, why is the war still demanding more money, more military operations, and more American lives? Hegseth's response was that combat ineffective never meant Iran would have absolutely no ability to fire missiles. His argument was that Iran's military had been pushed back dramatically and that its ability to fight the United States at scale had been severely damaged. That's an important distinction, but Ossoff wasn't satisfied. He wanted Hegseth to stand behind the exact words he had used months earlier. And when Hegseth wouldn't simply say that those earlier statements were accurate, Ossoff continued pressing him. Then another senator entered the conversation and pointed to what he described as evidence that Iran's missile capabilities may actually have improved in some areas. That brought the argument to the central issue. What does victory actually mean? Is victory destroying an enemy's military infrastructure? Is it preventing a nuclear weapon? Is it stopping missile attacks? Is it reopening the Strait of Hormuz? Or does victory require a long-term strategy that achieves all of those objectives? The administration clearly has its own definition, but Congress is demanding a clearer explanation. And that's why this hearing matters, because military decisions aren't made in a vacuum. When the government asks for another massive amount of taxpayer money, lawmakers have a responsibility to ask whether the strategy is working. And when officials make major claims about military success, they also have a responsibility to explain those claims when circumstances change. One of the most striking moments came when the criticism shifted from the troops to their leadership. Hegseth argued that calling the operation a failure disrespected the sacrifice of American service members, but the senator pushed back with a very different argument. The troops aren't the failure, leadership is. That's a distinction worth paying attention to. You can support American troops while still questioning the decisions of the people sending them into combat. You can respect military service while demanding accountability from civilian leaders. And you can believe Iran should never obtain a nuclear weapon while still asking whether the strategy being used to prevent it is actually working. That's ultimately what this hearing exposed. The debate isn't simply about whether America should fight Iran. It's about what the objective is, whether that objective has actually been achieved, and how much more the American people are going to be asked to pay before the conflict ends. Hegseth says Iran has been severely weakened. Ossoff says the administration's own earlier claims don't match what Americans are seeing now, and neither side appears willing to back down. So I'll leave you with the question Congress is still wrestling with. Was this really a victory, or was the victory declared before the war was actually over? Let us know what you think in the comments. This is Minute Alert. Subscribe for more congressional confrontations, political accountability, and the biggest stories coming out of Washington.